And joining us now to discuss Dr. Anthony Fauci's Senate appearance is Victoria Churchill. She's a U.S. political reporter for the Daily Mail. She covers Capitol Hill. Thanks for joining, Victoria, so early this morning. Those who were looking for any kind of productive exchange were left very disappointed with yesterday's performance by Dr. Fauci pleading the Fifth. So what do you expect to happen here with the attempt now to hold him in contempt?
Well, that attempt to hold him in contempt is scheduled for next week on August 5th. Now, the congressional decision is one thing. Senator Rand Paul, who of course chairs that committee that held the hearing yesterday, said that whether the Department of Justice decides to take up that contempt vote, if it is in the affirmative, that is something that he will leave up to the executive branch. But he is really teeing this up to make sure that Anthony Fauci is still given chances to provide answers to questions. There was a total of, I believe the number was 111 questions that he did not provide answers to. He made it pretty clear in the beginning of that hearing that he really did not intend to answer questions, but we still had 3 hours of questions from senators. Every single person went down the line and asked their questions, to which Fauci did not give answers. He was even asked by Senator Josh Hawley very mundane things like, what's the color of your tie? What's the color of your carpet? What day of the week is it? And he didn't give answers to any of those. So, I think that's pretty telling that he was not there to really provide any additional information into the investigation. And Ron Johnson, who you've already shared some clips of him here, he's also the leader of the investigation subcommittee. And so he chairs his own committee, and he's already asked Fauci, as well as several former employees of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to come in for transcribed interviews. So that format's going to be a little bit different from what we saw yesterday. If they do come in, it's more similar to the process that we've seen going on in the House for the Epstein files, where these are closed door question sessions. So, no media, no live stream, but those are typically released after those discussions are held.
Yeah, so interesting, because clearly he's one person, but there were many people surrounding him. Many people were aware of the various things happening. So it's not the only way to try to get to the truth of what actually took place. But going back to this situation of him facing any kind of culpability, in terms of the presidential pardon, is it possible there's another avenue for those like Rand Paul and Ron Johnson, who you just mentioned, who are really dead set on finding some accountability for Fauci?
Again, I think this next step of the transcribed interview is going to be very important because, in that format, I think it's not necessarily as adversarial as just having it fully on display for the media and the general public. But again, that process is made public later on. So, I think that might be possibly an avenue to get more answers. But of course, I mentioned the Epstein issue earlier. I think that actually, the way that investigation has been carried out is some blueprints for how this could continue to go on and how they could continue to seek answers from not only Fauci, but those around him. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri brought up that there was 8 members of his staff, I believe was the number that he pulled, that were, for example, applying for awards for Dr. Fauci for the work that he was doing on the pandemic. And so, there's still a lot of people in Fauci's orbit that do not have that pardon, that are going to be able to be brought in without that overarching pardon as an excuse for them to not provide answers.
Yeah, very fascinating. There's so many elements here. When I was talking to Dr. Robert Malone yesterday, he said maybe term limits for career bureaucrats in very key positions might be something to help offset these sort of quid pro quos that you're referring to, where somebody who distributes funding is also able to then receive cash awards in the form of some kind of a recognition. Just another element to all this that came out in the diaries. But I want to go back to the elements within the testimony yesterday, because it seems like most of the folks that were questioning Fauci critically were Republicans. And in the opening statement, the leading ranking Democrat, he took the inquiry to be partisan, and he admonished his peers when he had his chance to speak. Do you think the desire for accountability on COVID and the things that don't really add up, do you find that to be a partisan issue based on the work that you're doing?
Well, actually, I think that I would like to push back on that a little bit because I think we've seen Americans from all parts of the country become a lot more critical of government. And this was something that was brought up a number of times by members on the committee, even people like Republican Senator Joni Ernst. She brought up that the way that the government handled the pandemic, both the federal government and even state and local governments that were kind of working based on the advice that was given to them coming from Washington, D.C., that's created a lot of distrust, for government as a whole from a majority of the American people. And so, I think we even saw this, for example, with, our current health secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's somebody that Trump has known for a long time, but they've typically been, political opposites and political opponents even. And I think, even thinking back to the 2024 campaign trail, Trump had said like, oh, Bobby and I used to like sue each other all the time and things like that. So, it's really interesting that they would argue that because I think that just really speaks to how different DC is to the general public, where the general public, I think you've really seen a shift or a realignment of people's political beliefs for a large part since the handling of the pandemic.
Yeah, you do bring up a really interesting thing about how the lines that may have existed are blurring as people look for really what aligns with the things that they believe in, this issue being a stark example of that. Victoria Churchill, thank you so much for sharing your analysis with us this morning.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.